You asked for the job. You got the rejection email instead. You asked for the relationship to work. You got the silence instead, the kind that stretches over days, while you check your phone like checking could change what's written on it. You did the visualization. You wrote the affirmation on the mirror in dry erase marker. You said the words out loud in the car where nobody could hear you feel stupid saying them. And you meant them, actually meant them. And the universe, if it was listening at all, answered with the exact opposite of what you asked for. Here's the twist nobody in the manifestation world will tell you. You called it manifestation failing. What if failing was never the part that was true? There is a version of physics, debated for 70 years by serious physicists, that says something far stranger than you attract what you focus on. It says you can never actually witness the version of reality where the thing you wanted didn't happen to you. And by the end of this video, you're not going to look at a single coincidence or a single near miss the same way again. I need to tell you where this idea actually found me, because it wasn't in a physics lecture, and it wasn't in a bookstore self-help aisle either. It was in a hospital hallway 3 years ago, under fluorescent light that makes everyone look slightly grey, waiting for news about someone I loved. I remember running through every version of the next 10 minutes in my head, the version where the doctor walks out smiling, the version where he doesn't, the version where he says the word you're bracing for, and the version where he says something else entirely. And I remember realizing, with a kind of nausea I hadn't expected, that only one of those versions was about to become the only one I would ever actually get to live through. The others wouldn't just fail to happen to me. They would, in some sense I couldn't name yet, simply never have existed for me at all. Never almost happened, just never happened. I remember the specific detail of counting ceiling tiles, the way people do when their mind needs somewhere neutral to go. I remember thinking that whatever happened in the next few minutes was already in some sense decided. The outcome already existed somewhere, already true, and that all I was actually waiting for was to find out which reality I was already standing inside of, not to change it, just to learn it. That feeling of standing at a fork where every branch feels equally real right up until the second before it isn't, is the feeling most people are actually chasing when they talk about manifesting. They don't really want magic, if you push past the vocabulary. They want control over which branch they end up having to live inside of. They want the fork to bend toward them on purpose because they asked correctly. And somewhere in the last 15 years, a very old idea from quantum physics got dragged into that hunger, dressed up in soft language and sold back to people as certainty. You've probably heard the pitch, maybe more than once, maybe from a best-selling book with a gold cover. Your consciousness collapses reality by observing it, the claim goes. So if you observe abundance hard enough, with enough belief, you collapse abundance into existence around you. It's in documentaries with dramatic music and slow-motion shots of galaxies. It sounds like science because it borrows science's vocabulary wholesale without ever borrowing science's discipline. And it's seductive for an obvious reason. It puts you back in the driver's seat of a life that most days doesn't feel like it has a driver's seat at all. If reality bends toward belief, then every disappointment has a fixable cause. Believe harder, visualize better, clear the resistance. The pitch works because the alternative, that outcomes are genuinely, structurally out of your hands, is close to unbearable to sit with for very long. Think about what that alternative actually asks of you. It asks you to hold two things at once: that you have real agency over your effort, your choices, your attention, and that you have no guaranteed authority over the outcome those things produce. Most people can't hold both at the same time, so they collapse the tension in one direction or the other. Either nothing you do matters, or everything you do matters enough to guarantee the result. Neither one is true. The actual answer sits, uncomfortably, in the middle, which is exactly the kind of answer that doesn't sell very well. Here's the mini revelation, and it's an uncomfortable one if you've built any part of your worldview on that idea. That popular version isn't really what quantum mechanics says. It's a simplification stretched so far past its actual meaning that most working physicists visibly wince when they hear it repeated back to them. The real physics underneath it is stranger, more rigorous, and far less flattering to your sense of personal control. Once you understand it correctly, it doesn't hand you the reins at all. So why has the misreading survived for decades, told and retold in books that sell millions of copies? Partly because nobody wants to hear the honest version. You can't control outcomes, but you can only ever experience the outcomes that let you keep existing. Doesn't fit on a poster. It doesn't sell a course. It just happens to be closer to what the actual physics, read carefully, is quietly pointing at. It hands you something closer to an explanation for why you're still standing here, still asking the question, instead of somewhere else, not asking anything, which is a very different gift than the one you were promised, and, I'd argue, a stranger and more useful one once you actually sit with it. That's the part almost nobody tells you when they're selling you the observer creates reality version. Real physics doesn't hand you a lever to pull. It hands you a mirror, and the reflection in it isn't you control outcomes. It's closer to you can only ever be found in the outcomes that let you keep looking. Those are not the same claim, and confusing them is exactly how an entire industry got built on a misreading. So before we get to why that's true, we have to go back to where this entire confusion actually started. This isn't a wellness industry borrowing. It's a real experiment, run for real over and over for 2 centuries now, with results so strange that a century of the smartest people in physics still argue about what they mean. Because you can't understand what breaks reality until you understand what physics actually caught reality doing, back when nobody expected to catch it doing anything strange at all. Picture a wall with 2 narrow slits cut into it, side by side, and behind that wall a screen that lights up wherever something strikes it. Now picture firing something at that wall, not a wave, not a beam, but a single individual particle at a time, one after another, spaced out enough that there's no way they could be bumping into each other or interfering with one another on the way through. If you fired individual marbles through 2 slits like this, you'd expect exactly 2 clean bands on the screen behind the wall, one lined up with each slit, the way any solid object behaves when it passes through an opening. That's what particles are supposed to do. That is not what happened. What showed up instead was a rippling pattern of many bands, light and dark. The exact signature pattern you'd get from 2 overlapping waves interfering with each other, as if each individual particle had somehow passed through both slits at once and interfered with its own possible paths. If you saw this on a screen in front of you, your first instinct would be that something must have gone wrong with the setup. Nothing had. This is the double-slit experiment, first performed with light in the early 1800s by Thomas Young, and later repeated with individual electrons, and eventually with entire atoms and even large molecules, always producing the same impossible interference pattern. Here's what that experiment actually proves, stated as plainly as physics allows. At the smallest scales, matter doesn't behave like a solid, located object. It behaves like a spread of probabilities, a wave of possible locations and paths, right up until something forces it to resolve into one single, definite outcome. That part isn't controversial. Every physicist, regardless of which interpretation they favor, agrees on the underlying math. Here's what it does not prove, and this is exactly where the self-help version quietly lies to you. It does not prove that your thoughts, your wishes, or your positive vibrations are the something doing the forcing. What forced the resolution in the original experiments was something far less mystical than a hopeful mind, a measuring device, a detector placed at the slits, a piece of equipment that physically interacted with the particle, whether or not any human being was in the room, paying attention, or feeling optimistic about the result. You've probably felt something structurally similar to this without any physics involved at all. The way a plan feels open and full of branching possibility right up until the moment you actually commit to it. And then, the instant you do, every other version of that plan quietly stops being available to you. That collapse from many possible futures down to one lived reality is the exact shape of what's happening inside that experiment, just at a scale small enough to actually measure directly and repeatably in a lab. For most of the 20th century, the dominant explanation for this collapse was called the Copenhagen interpretation, developed largely by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg through the 1920s in conversations that are still argued over today. Picture it in terms you already know. It says the wave of possibilities is genuinely real while unmeasured, and the act of measurement, physical interaction with the wider world, not consciousness specifically, not belief, not intention, collapses it into a single actual outcome. The same way your own life collapses into one lived day the moment you actually get out of bed instead of imagining 10 different mornings. The other possibilities don't happen somewhere else, quietly, out of view. They simply stop being possible, erased, gone, the moment the measurement occurs. That's the version most people quietly absorb, even without ever learning its name. One reality, one outcome. Everything else erased the instant it loses to whatever actually happened. So here's the question that should stop you for a second. If Copenhagen is right, and the unchosen outcomes are simply erased, never real anywhere for anyone, then every rejection, every loss, every version of your life where things went visibly wrong was real right up until the exact moment it wasn't. And then it was nothing. Erased, not survived, not relocated, just gone. Does that match how it actually feels to live through a near miss, when your body still remembers the fear of the outcome that didn't happen? Or does something about that explanation feel quietly incomplete, like it's missing a piece it can't quite account for? Because Copenhagen was never the only interpretation seriously on the table, and the one that challenges it most directly doesn't erase the losing branches at all. It does something far stranger with them. Beat, you're most of the way through the physics now, and I want to pause here, because this next part is the hinge the entire video turns on. So stay with the logic, even if it starts to feel personal. In 1957, a physicist named Hugh Everett III, then a graduate student at Princeton, proposed something so radical that his own doctoral advisor initially discouraged him from publishing it in its full form. Everett asked a simple, almost brutal question, one worth asking about your own life right now, not just about particles. What if the wave of possibilities never actually collapses at all? What if, instead, every possible outcome keeps happening, in full, in parallel, and the universe itself branches at that exact instant, splitting into separate, equally real, fully physical versions, one for each possible outcome, and you, the observer, only ever end up experiencing the single branch that happens to contain the version of you doing the observing? This became known as the many worlds interpretation, and here is exactly what it does and does not prove, stated with the precision it deserves. It proves that the underlying mathematics of quantum mechanics works completely cleanly, without ever needing a mysterious, undefined collapse bolted on from outside the equations. The math runs smoothly if you simply let every outcome happen somewhere, with nothing added and nothing subtracted. What it does not prove, and no honest physicist will claim otherwise on camera, is that those other branches actually exist in any way we could ever detect, measure, visit, or communicate with. There is no experiment currently running or foreseeable on any horizon that can confirm or rule out many worlds against Copenhagen. It remains, formally and permanently, an interpretation, a story fully consistent with the math, not a fact the math has confirmed. Any video, including this one, that tells you otherwise is overstating what the science actually says, and you should be suspicious of any source that doesn't say that part out loud. But sit with the internal logic for a second, purely as logic, because this is exactly where it stops being abstract and starts being about you specifically. If many worlds is correct, then the version of you who read the rejection email didn't get erased in some other branch, the way Copenhagen would suggest. She's still there, in a branch every bit as physically real as this one, living out a life that split away from yours at the precise moment the outcome resolved. And you, the one experiencing this sentence right now, in whatever room you're sitting in, are by strict definition only ever the version of you who is doing the experiencing. You cannot, even in principle, even for a fraction of a second, experience being the branch where you don't exist to experience anything at all. You are structurally guaranteed, by the very nature of what observation is, to only ever find yourself in a branch where you're still here to find yourself in it. Read that again slowly, because it is not a comforting sentence, even though it might sound like one at first. It's a description of a trap built directly into the architecture of experience itself. Not X, you being specially protected, singled out, watched over. Why? you being structurally incapable of ever witnessing your own absence. Two very different claims, wearing the exact same disguise. That trap has a name in both physics and philosophy of mind: the observation selection effect. And it's about to walk straight out of theoretical physics and directly into every lucky break you've ever quietly, privately taken credit for. Here's where this stops being about atoms and interference patterns and starts being about your actual memory of your actual life. Think about the near misses you can list without even trying. The flight you almost took that had a delay, the road you weren't driving down that day for no particular reason, the meeting you skipped on a whim that turned out to matter enormously, the relationship that ended right before it would have gotten genuinely bad. Most people tell those stories as evidence of protection. Something, someone, some force was watching out for me specifically, arranging the timing on my behalf. Ask yourself honestly, how many of those stories do you have? Most people, pressed for a minute, can list 3 or 4 without even trying hard. That number alone should be a clue. If you were actually being individually protected by some intervening force, why would protection need to happen so often? Or is frequency itself telling you something different about what's really going on underneath the story? But notice the shape of the evidence itself, closely, for a second. You can only tell that story because you're here to tell it. Every version of you who wasn't this lucky isn't sitting somewhere else, quietly unable to post about it, waiting their turn to be asked. There's no unlucky version of you comparing notes with you afterward. The entire sample of people telling dramatic near-miss stories is, by strict definition, filtered down to exactly the people the near-miss didn't ultimately happen to. This isn't quantum physics anymore, and it doesn't need to be still be unsettling. This is a well-documented feature of ordinary human memory, and it has a name outside of physics too: survivorship bias, and its close cousin, the reconstructive nature of memory itself. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus spent decades demonstrating something genuinely unsettling about how memory actually functions. It isn't a recording you replay faithfully on demand. It's a story your mind rebuilds every single time you recall it, and that rebuilding is quietly shaped by what you already believe about yourself and what you need the story to mean. What Loftus's research proves is specific and well replicated. Memory is reconstructive, and it can be measurably distorted by suggestion and prior belief after an event has already happened. In some of her most cited work, participants were shown to develop confident, detailed memories of events that had been merely suggested to them, not because they were lying, but because the mind genuinely can't always tell the difference between a memory it retrieved and a memory it just quietly built to fit what it already expected to find. What it does not prove is that every memory is false, or that your near misses weren't real events with real stakes. The events happened. What gets quietly rebuilt afterward is the meaning you attach to having survived them. And meaning, unlike the event itself, is negotiable every time you retell the story. So here's the uncomfortable bridge between the physics and your actual life. You feel like reality is arranging itself around you, protecting you, rewarding your manifestation, partly because you are only ever available, only ever present, to notice the branches where that feeling turns out to be true. The times it worked get remembered vividly, retold at dinner, filed away as proof of a system that favors you. The times it didn't work get quietly filed under "not yet" or "wasn't meant to be," kept in the story somewhere, technically, but carefully stripped of any power to actually disprove the system you've built. This isn't evidence of a gift, in other words. It's evidence of a filter you can't see from inside it. Think about the last time something you desperately wanted didn't happen, and a year later, you found yourself genuinely grateful it hadn't. You probably told that story afterward as growth. I manifested something better without even realizing it at the time. Look at it again now with everything we've covered. You didn't manifest the better outcome into being. You survived into the branch where the worse one closed off, and then, being the kind of mind that needs its own life to make sense in retrospect, you built a narrative afterward that made the closing feel intentional, even destined. That's not a flaw unique to you, and it isn't a character defect. It's what any self-aware mind does with an unbearable amount of raw randomness. It turns survival into a story, because a story is far easier to live inside of than raw, exposed contingency. Watch how this plays out with something as ordinary as a diagnosis that turns out benign. People rarely say, "The odds were in my favor that time." They say, "I knew it would be okay," retroactively, as if the knowing had caused the outcome instead of simply following it. The story gets rewritten to put belief in front of the result, when belief was actually standing behind it the whole time, quietly borrowing credit after the fact. But there's a cost to that comfort, and it's the same cost every single time you pay it. If you credit the branch you're currently in for having chosen you, specially, you will eventually, quietly, blame yourself in the branches that don't go your way for not having been chosen hard enough. You weren't protected then. You were filtered by the simple, structural fact that only the branches where you remain are the ones you're ever around to describe. There's a version of this that shows up in something as mundane as job hunting. Someone applies to 40 positions, hears back from 2, gets the one that actually fits, and tells the story afterward as, "I manifested the right opportunity." What actually happened statistically is closer to this. 38 branches closed quietly, without ceremony, and the 2 that stayed open were the only material this person ever had to build a story out of. The story isn't wrong that something happened. It's wrong about which part was the miracle, the getting or simply the being present to describe it either way. You can run this test on your own life right now if you're willing. Pick the story you tell most often about how something worked out for you. Now ask how many quieter, unremarkable versions of that same attempt never made it into a story at all, simply because nothing dramatic happened in them. The applications that went nowhere, the plans that fizzled without incident, the ordinary Tuesdays where the thing you wanted just didn't arrive and life continued anyway. Those don't disappear because they were failures. They disappear because they never gave you a reason to narrate them. That single distinction is about to matter more than anything else in this video, because it's the exact hinge between the comforting version of this idea, the one sold in the best-selling books, and the far stranger one that should actually unsettle you before it clarifies anything. There is one thought experiment that takes everything we've just covered and pushes it to its most extreme, most genuinely disturbing possible conclusion. And I want to be completely upfront before I even describe it, because precision matters more here than anywhere else in this video. This is a thought experiment. It has never been performed. No ethics board on Earth would ever approve it. No physicist who discusses it seriously is advocating that anyone attempt it. It exists purely as a logical tool for testing an idea, the same way a runaway trolley hurtling toward 5 people exists purely as a logical tool in ethics classrooms, not as an instruction for anyone's actual life. It's called quantum suicide, first described by computer scientist and futurist Hans Moravec, and later developed into a more rigorous form by physicist Max Tegmark in the 1990s. Here's the structure, described only as the abstract logic problem it is, and never as instruction, never as suggestion, never as anything resembling advice. Think of it the way you'd think through a puzzle, not a plan. Imagine a device wired to a quantum event with a genuinely 50-50 outcome, something like the decay of a single unstable particle, arranged so that one outcome does nothing at all, and the other outcome would be instantly and painlessly fatal. Now imagine, purely as a thought experiment and nothing else, someone willing to trigger that device repeatedly. Under the Copenhagen interpretation, you would expect, after enough repetitions, that they would very likely be gone. Probability, run out far enough, catches up with everyone eventually. That's simply what a 50-50 odds device does over many trials. But under many worlds, something stranger follows, and only from the internal logic of the interpretation itself, not from any observed fact. Each trigger doesn't produce one outcome somewhere in the world. It produces 2 full branches, one where the fatal event occurs, and one where it doesn't. And critically, structurally, there is no branch in which a them exists to experience the fatal outcome, because experiencing requires continuing, and the fatal branch is precisely the one where continuing stopped. In every single branch where anyone remains present to experience anything at all, by strict definition, it is the branch where they survived. From the inside, and only ever from the inside, the only place you have ever actually experienced anything from, it would seem, run after run after run, as if they kept surviving no matter how astronomically improbable that survival became when viewed from the outside. This is what physicists sometimes call quantum immortality, and I want to slow all the way down here, because this is exactly the point where a video like this could become genuinely irresponsible if it isn't handled with total precision. And because the internet has a long, ugly track record of stripping the caveats off ideas like this one until only the exciting-sounding headline survives. This is not a claim that you are, or that anyone is biologically or actually immortal in any real sense. It is not a claim that many worlds has been proven true. It is not a claim that risking your one actual life is somehow protected by physics, or that danger is an illusion. It is a logical consequence that follows only if you accept an interpretation that remains, honestly, entirely unconfirmed. And even physicists who take many worlds seriously mostly treat quantum suicide as a flawed thought experiment because it quietly smuggles in an assumption about the continuity of a single observer that many of them think the branching structure doesn't actually support once you examine it closely. This is a tool built for stress testing an idea to its absolute limit. It is not a description of how anyone should treat their one actual irreplaceable life. What it proves, carefully and narrowly stated, if many worlds is true, then subjective continuity, your unbroken felt sense of being you, moment to moment, day to day, could only ever be experienced from inside a branch where that continuity holds. What it does not prove, that this makes you special, protected, chosen, or safe in any practical sense. In this branch, in this one life, the only one you can actually act inside of, make choices inside of, lose things inside of. You've been sitting with a lot of dense logic for a while now, so here's the bridge back to the only place any of it actually matters. Not the branches you'll never visit, but the branch you're reading this sentence from, right now, with a body that can still be hurt, and a life that still has real stakes in it. This is worth repeating in plain language, because it's the part that actually protects you from misusing anything you just heard. Nothing in this thought experiment makes this life less real, less fragile, or less worth protecting. If anything, it does the opposite. It's the only life you will ever have direct access to defending. So here's the mechanism underneath everything we've built toward across this entire video, stated as plainly as I can make it. You are not manifesting your outcomes into being. You are not attracting your branch through belief or intention or vibration. What you are, structurally, at the deepest level anyone has managed to describe, is the only kind of thing that can ever be found asking, why did this happen to me? Because asking the question requires being present to ask it, and being present requires having landed, this particular time, in a branch where you're still here to land in. Zoom out for a second, because this is where it stops being about quantum branches you'll never confirm and starts being about the actual, single, non-branching life you're living right now, in the one timeline you get to act inside of, whether or not any of the others turn out to be real. If none of this makes you special, if it isn't proof you were chosen, protected, or doing manifestation right while someone else does it wrong, then what was every survived rejection, every strange coincidence, every near miss actually made of underneath the story you told yourself about it? It was never a gift or a punishment for anything you did or didn't do. Just evidence that you're still asking. That's all any of it was ever proof of. And it turns out that's not nothing. In fact, it might be the only thing that was ever actually verifiably true. I want to talk to you directly for a minute now because I think you already know exactly which version of your life this whole video has been about. You're the one who asked for the thing that didn't come. You know precisely which one it was. The job, the person, the year that was supposed to look different than the year you actually got. And you've spent real private time wondering what you did wrong to deserve the other outcome. Whether your belief wasn't strong enough, whether you're somehow bad at the one skill everyone around you seems to have already figured out. If you're honest, part of you has probably rehearsed the apology you'd give the universe if you got the chance. A quieter version of, "I'll believe harder next time," said to nobody, in the middle of an ordinary day. That rehearsal has never once changed an outcome. It just kept you company while you waited to find out which branch you'd already landed in. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's coming. The thing you wanted, the version you were promised by every account that told you belief was the whole mechanism. I don't know that, I can't know that, and I gently push back on anyone selling you that certainty with total confidence, because they don't know it either. Nobody does. That's not pessimism. That's just honesty about the size of the thing we're actually talking about. Maybe it comes later in a shape you don't recognize yet. Maybe it doesn't come at all, and something you can't currently imagine takes its place instead. Both of those are true for different people watching this right now, and no amount of belief sorts you into one group or the other. What I can tell you with something closer to certainty is this: you are right now in the branch where you kept going, not the branch where the disappointment quietly ended the story. This one, right here, the one where you're still watching, still turning this over, still awake enough at whatever hour you're hearing this to want an actual answer, instead of a comfortable one that dissolves the second you stop believing it hard enough. That's not luck you should feel guilty for not somehow deserving more of. It's not proof you were chosen over anyone else who didn't make it to this branch with you. It's simply where you are. And where you are, this exact place, is the only location you will ever actually get to do anything from. So stop auditing yourself for the belief you supposedly didn't have enough of. That audit was never measuring anything real. It was just the story your mind built to explain a branch it can't actually see the mechanics of. You don't owe the outcome an apology for how it turned out. You were never the one holding the lever. You didn't survive the versions of your life that didn't happen. There's no surviving something you were never inside of. You were just never anywhere else to begin with. And that turns out to be the whole, quiet, unglamorous truth underneath everything you've been calling manifestation. Go all the way back to the rejection email, the silence that stretched for days, the version of manifestation failing you were quietly carrying when this video first started. Here's what that failure actually was, once you strip away the mysticism on one side of it and the self-blame waiting on the other. It wasn't proof the universe was punishing you for some invisible mistake, and it wasn't proof you were doing something wrong that other, more spiritually advanced people had figured out. It was a branch closing, one outcome among several that were for a moment all genuinely possible. And you, being the only kind of thing that can ever ask the question afterward, landed in the branch where you kept living, instead of the one where that particular hope quietly ended. This was never about being chosen, and it was never about being punished. It's about still being here. And still here turns out to be the only fact in this entire video that was ever actually load-bearing. Every loop this video opened closes on that same single point. The physics that gets casually borrowed to sell you control over your own reality was never really about control at all. It was about the strange, structural fact that observation can only ever happen from inside a branch where the observer remains present to do the observing. The near misses you've been quietly stacking up for years as evidence of protection were never protection at all. They were the filtered residue of a mind that can only ever report back from wherever it's still standing. And the thought experiment that sounds, on the surface, like a promise of immortality, was never actually a promise about your body, your safety, or your future. It was a mirror held up to the one thing that genuinely is unbroken every single time you wake up. The fact that something in you is still asking the question in the first place. You were never manifesting the outcome into existence. You were never failing to manifest it either. You were just doing the only thing a conscious mind can structurally do, showing up again in whichever branch let you keep showing up, and quietly mistaking that continuity for a system you could learn to master with enough belief. That mistake wasn't foolish. It was almost inevitable. A mind built to find patterns will find one even in pure contingency, because a universe with no pattern at all is harder to live inside of than almost anything else you could be asked to accept. Forgive yourself for the pattern you built. Just don't keep paying rent on it. Maybe that's not the answer you came here hoping for. It's the one that happens to actually be true, as far as anyone honestly knows. Not the version with the gold cover, but the version that leaves you standing here anyway still asking, which turns out to be exactly enough. You didn't attract this exact moment, the one you're in right now, hearing these words. You survived into it. And now what you choose to build here in this branch, with the time you actually have, that's the only part of any of this that was ever really yours to decide. If any of that shifted something in you, even slightly, subscribing isn't really about the algorithm, and it never has been on this channel. It's a small, quiet vote for the version of you that wants to keep asking real questions instead of comfortable ones, the kind that don't dissolve the moment you stop believing them hard enough. And that's the only person this channel has ever actually been made for. Comment 2 words. Still here. If this reframed how you think about manifestation, the ebook, The Quiet Force, goes deeper into the psychology underneath it. Link in the description. Next video. The psychological reason your brain needs these stories to be true, even when they're not.